Hi, I'm Laura Lawton with Lawton Printing Services. Welcome to Candidate Confidential. We're happy to have you join us. We're happy to join Spokane Talks online for this important civic service. The Lawton team has been serving the Inland Northwest for over 77 years. What keeps us motivated is the continuous evolution of our company to better serve the clients we work with every day. We are also fortunate to have so many people willing to step up to serve our communities. Being a candidate and civil servant is too often a thankless job. I know you join me in thanking these forward-thinking individuals for their dedication to us all. With that, I thank you for taking the time to learn more about the people who want to lead our communities. Enjoy the debate and give Lawton a call for any of your marketing, printing, or mailing needs. Thank you.
On behalf of Spokane Talks Online, I'm John Allison with Candidate Confidential, and today we are pleased to have two representatives who are on opposing sides of the Proposition 2 measure for City of Spokane, which involves oil and rail cars traveling through the city. We'll take a break and get right to the discussion after this.
Proposition 2 is not about politics. It's about protecting Spokane's economy.
I'm opposed to Proposition 2.
I'm opposed to Prop 2.
I'm opposed to Proposition 2.
Proposition 2 just doesn't make sense.
I am opposing Proposition 2.
I'm against Proposition 2.
I'm opposed to Proposition 2.
I'm opposed to Prop 2 because we have to protect Spokane's economy.
And back now to discuss Proposition 2, a measure that would impose a civil fine on oil and rail cars passing through the city of Spokane that did not take certain safety measures. There's a lot of debate about this. We have two gentlemen, Jim Lee on the yes on Prop 2 side and Michael Cathhart for the no on Prop 2 side. Gentlemen, we'll start first talking about general safety considerations. And Jim Lee, you by coin toss, you've got the first question here, and that is, give us your assessment, your opinion about the current safety status of the cars that travel through Spokane on a daily basis.
All right, thank you, John. Well, there's some indisputable facts that we need to get out about these trains. All the trains that pass through Spokane carry the Bakken crude oil from North Dakota by Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway. And the Bakken crude oil is quite different from traditional crude oil in that it has much higher volatility. There's a standard measure in the industry. It's called the Reid Vapor Pressure Index. And the Reid Vapor Pressure Index for West Texas Intermediate crude is 3 psi. For gasoline, it's about 8 psi. And for Bakken crude oil, it ranges from 8 to 16 psi. In other words, it is literally more explosive, up to 75% more explosive than gasoline. And that does the derailment and fire in Lynchburg, Virginia. The oil was tested at 13 to 14 psi. Again, that's compared with 9 for gasoline. The other thing that comes into it is the fact that derailments happen all the time. On average, the latest figures I could find from 2011 to 13, there were an average of 9 derailments per month in the Pacific Northwest region, which includes Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. So that's, about 2 a week. Now, a lot of those are minor, but it's a numbers game. The other thing that people have to realize is just the scale of the amount of oil that is flowing through Spokane. Each one of these 100 to 130 car trains carries around 3 million gallons of this highly flammable liquid.
Mr. Cathcart, let me ask you.
Sure.
Setting aside the specifics of this measure in some way, do you believe, and does your side of this measure believe, that the community is safe with these cars going through town?
We do believe the community is safe under the investments that Burlington Northern and Union Pacific have made in the rail tracks to make sure that they're safe. We believe that they are. Sheriff Knezovich has come out and strongly said that he believes provisions are in place if there ever was an incident that it would be taken care of, that he's not concerned about something like this happening and getting out of control. And to maybe rebut a couple of things that were said here, currently the vapor pressure in their proposal is already what the vapor pressure is of the oil that comes through Spokane. And the PSI, there's two different measurements that they're trying to regulate within their initiative. And the PSI measurement of which is currently 13.8 would actually increase to 15 if this were moved to trucks, which is what the alternative would be and would actually make us less safe. So right now it's actually safer being on a rail car than it would be on a semi-truck. And when you're talking about having 280 semi-trucks, the equivalent of one train, you're talking about a lot of potential for incidents on our highways, not to mention the congestion, the increase in the greenhouse gas emissions, and things like that. Now, Tyco Williams, which is a industrial firefighting organization, they've done research, and they have shown that Bakken crude oil is no more flammable than any other oil out there. It extinguishes just the same as any other oil that's coming, whether it's Texas or someplace else. And the federal administration has said that there is no one single measurement that determines volatility. So to say that PSI, which has not actually been used by the federal government as a measurement of volatility since 1990, is the standard that we should be going by, is just not scientifically accurate. And so we think that the initiative that's proposed uses standards that don't necessarily mesh with what the scientific standards are today.
Mr. Cathcart, 1 minute to respond.
Well, probably the most important point there is that the Bakken crude oil fires have been absolutely devastating. And for example, in Mosier, Oregon last year, the firefighters can't extinguish a crude oil fire. All they can do is contain it and try to keep and let it burn itself out, watch it burn itself out. It took 14 hours in Mosier, Oregon. It's taken much longer in some other instances. That was a relatively small incident. Read vapor pressure is a well-accepted comparison. You compare gasoline to Bakken crude oil. He quoted 13. We want to bring it down to 8. There's been one oil spill of Bakken crude that did not burn. That was in Culbertson, Montana, and the vapor pressure was tested at between 8 and 9. Every other spill of Bakken crude oil has resulted in a fiery explosion.
Now, what I would add, though, is gasoline actually is at a PSI of over 40 when it's traveling on rail cars, not 8. So I don't think that number is accurate. But in addition, you've got propane, you've got things like chlorine that travel on rail cars, and they travel at a PSI of, again, in the 40s. And we're not trying to, their measure does not regulate those. And so it's not necessarily a safety measure that they're trying to tackle. They're tackling a political ideology, a political issue, which is the coal and oil. And if we're talking about volatility, coal would not be a part of this conversation, which it is in their measure. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, the safety argument, because there's a lot of other products that travel on the railroads that would be more volatile.
I want to switch to the legal considerations. That's another topic. And certainly, Mr. Cathcart, I think it's fair to say that the No on 2 side is forecasting significant legal issues and challenges if this measure is approved. What does your side foresee in that regard?
Well, it's not just us suggesting that there would be legal challenges. The executive director of the Center for Justice has come out and said that this is on shaky legal grounds. The hearing examiner of the city of Spokane, whose job it is to review these measures and determine the legal viability of any initiative that comes forward, has said that it does not meet legal standards. The city council's own hearing, or the city council's own policy advisor, who is an attorney himself, has said that this is not likely to pass legal muster. So it's not just us suggesting that, but if it does pass in November, we're very concerned that you're going to have a lot of folks on various sides all coming together to sue the city of Spokane. One side suing to enforce, one side suing to overturn. And guess who's stuck in the middle? The taxpayers, who now are forced to foot the bill for litigation that was never necessary to begin with.
Mr. Lee, would you agree that there will likely be court challenges with regard to the federal claims of federal superiority over the rail system? And if there are, what are the arguments that you believe would lead the yes side to prevail in court?
Well, it's really astonishingly simple. The Federal Railway Safety Act, National Railway Safety Act, has a provision, Section 20106, which provides that states are permitted to adopt railroad regulations if the Secretary of Transportation has not, quote, prescribed a regulation or issued an order covering the subject matter of the state requirements. There are no federal regulations regarding vapor pressure or flash point or covering of rail cars. Therefore, the intent of Congress, and this is really a states' rights issue, because as a Constitution states, anything that is not specifically addressed by the federal governments is left to the states. And that's exactly how this would be recognized.
Mr. Cathhart, would you agree that the feds have been largely silent on these specific regulations at issue in the proposition?
Well, no. In fact, the federal government, again, doesn't use the standards they're using as an accurate measurement of volatility. So I think that's probably why that may not be included. So scientifically, what they're after just does not make sense. But beyond that, this really belongs at the federal level. You can't have a hodgepodge of various rules that will undermine interstate commerce. It would be like shutting down I-90 at the Idaho border. You just can't do it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It hurts other states. It hurts other communities just as much as it hurts us. And it violates the Interstate Commerce Act.
Mr. Lee.
Well, first of all, the federal government has a regulation that has been put forward to regulate specifically the read vapor pressure of crude oil shipments by rail. It has not been implemented and almost certainly will not be implemented under the current administration. And that's exactly why Congress puts in a provision that allows states to do what's technically called gap filler legislation, such that we can address issues that haven't been addressed at the federal level. The other thing that's been used as a scare tactic, and it was mentioned here already, is the cost of the legal, because this is a very simple case. I mean, if the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act applies, then that's one. It's either that or the National Federal Railway Safety Act applies, and it's a case that can be handled very easily by the city attorney's staff. We have volunteer pro bono legal services and technical support. It's not going to be an expensive case. So when they throw out millions of dollars, it's more like maybe $100,000. And that's
I would just say, as this moves up to the various courts, the cost is going to increase, and the taxpayers, the city of Spokane, will be on the hook for some or most or all of those legal bills. And I would just add one other piece to this, and that is if indeed this is a states' rights issue, as Jim is suggesting, then it should be handled at the legislative level, not at the city of Spokane level. Again, it goes back to having these small areas of hodgepodge of rules that change things that will undermine interstate commerce. And so even if it is a states' rights issue, the city of Spokane is not the right level to be addressing.
In the state of Washington, we have what's called unitary government, and that means that the city of Spokane is effectively, essentially, a branch of the state government and has the authority to do such regulation. As far as a hodgepodge, first of all, I didn't get a chance to say that nothing in this regulation would impact railway operations in any way. we recognize that the railroads have to carry almost any cargo they're given. The penalty is applied to the oil producers and the coal companies, the coal shippers. There is no regulation, in fact, of the railroad operations. But even if it does, if it is interpreted that way, the National Railway Safety Act is totally clear as far as our ability.
I want to turn to the economic impacts of this, because that's certainly been part of the discussion as well. Mr. Lee, your opponents, those who are fighting this proposition, say there could be economic devastation to the region if all of a sudden this proposition causes a major disruption of the shipments that we've seen. What is your assessment? What are your arguments about the economic impact if Proposition 2 is approved?
Well, our biggest argument is you have to understand the scope of the potential damage of an oil fire in Spokane. The economic consequences, small village in Quebec, 6,000 people, had a derailment fire, Lac Mégantic, and their costs for damages, cleanup, and rebuilding the downtown at a new location because they couldn't go back is somewhere between $2 and $3 billion. The government estimates for a town like Des Moines, Iowa, it would be $3 billion. San Francisco, 8.8 billion. Spokane, 4 to 6 billion. So you want to talk about economic devastation, and the railway companies have very limited liability insurance. It will end up with the taxpayers to foot the bill to get any damage repaired.
Mr. Cathhart.
Yeah, I would say there's a reason why a big swath of our community have come together to oppose Proposition 2. And that includes the business community, the Spokane Association of Realtors, the Associated General Contractors, Spokane Home Builders Association, Greater Spokane Incorporated, but it also includes labor unions. We have the Machinists Union has come on board and said that this is not the right way to go about this, that conversations with the railroads are the right direction to try and address some of these things. Take it to the federal level and address it there. And the reason being that it's going to impact local jobs. Burlington Northern itself employs around 500 employees in the Spokane region, and those are jobs that would be affected if this were to be approved and implemented, because suddenly what's going to happen is, and it'll affect a lot of other sectors as well, but what will happen is you'll see a reduction in rail traffic coming through Spokane, which means some of those jobs are less necessary because they're either taking other routes or, again, they're being put on trucks. Or in addition to that, what will happen is folks that need to use the rail lines for moving manufactured goods, for moving ag goods, agricultural products, they will find that there are fewer opportunities because there are fewer trains coming through town, and they will find that it's more expensive to do so. So it's going to effectively raise the price on all those things. And lastly, I would just add that we know in the measure itself, it cites that this would create a 4 cent, essentially a 4 cent per gallon gas tax. That doesn't get us one more inch of roadway, but it is a 4 cent gas tax. Now, we believe that that is vastly underestimating the actual cost of the regulations that they're advocating. We believe that it would actually cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to build the refineries necessary to lower the PSI of this oil to where they're advocating for in their measure. And again, unnecessarily so, but it would cost a lot of money to folks in Washington State when they go to the pump.
I want to give both of you an opportunity to address the voters directly and summarize your positions on behalf of your respective parts of this campaign. And we'll start with Mr. Cathcart on the no on Prop 2 side.
I would just ask that folks take a real hard look at this measure. Consider, is this the right issue for the city of Spokane? Should the city of Spokane be getting in the business of regulating the railroads? Should they be putting us in danger of very costly litigation? Or should they be focusing on taking care of roads and police and doing the necessary local items that is really within their purview? If you live in the city of Spokane, this is going to be on your ballot. We definitely ask you to vote no. read it thoroughly. If you live outside the city of Spokane, you can't vote on this, but it does impact you if it impacts rail traffic and it impacts manufacturers and it impacts agricultural folks in our community. And so please talk to your friends, talk to those that you know in the city of Spokane, and tell them that this is not something that you support and that they should vote no as well.
Mr. Lee, your final thoughts.
Thank you. You know, there's a similar oil field in Texas called the Permian Basin. And when they started pumping crude there, they built that considerably costly facility to stabilize the oil. And they did it because the pipelines wouldn't accept the high pressure crude oil. In North Dakota, they didn't use pipelines to the same extent, so they haven't, but it's okay to ship that high volatility, highly explosive crude oil through Spokane on vulnerable rail cars. Pipelines are much safer, and they still require it to be reduced. I think the 4 cents a gallon is probably on the high side, depending on how you frame it over time, but that would not be paid by the people of Spokane. It's not a tax. It's what it would cost the oil producers to do the processing that's required, which is getting the highly flammable butane and propane components out before it's shipped by rail and reducing the flammability. The campaign no is a classic example of big outside money coming into Spokane and trying to influence our elections. I just heard today that Tesoro is putting $25,000 into it, and we're a all-volunteer organization with a few $100s. And the people of Spokane have a history of recognizing this kind of outside influence and rejecting it and voting for what's good for our citizens. So we would ask you to protect our community and vote yes on Proposition 2.
And thank you both very much, Jim Lee on behalf of the Yes campaign and Michael Cathhart on behalf of the No campaign. And we certainly, it's a very complicated issue. Could not possibly cover it in one 20-minute segment here altogether. Would encourage you to go online, search other resources, and please vote in November. Thank you and goodbye.